Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. We promise we will try to make this fairly short so you can get home for the debate. Some of you have already been at the bar a little bit too long, maybe. My name is John Carmichael, in case some of you don't know me, and this is my wife, Chris. We're both with the Historical Society, and we're very pleased to present our first production of the school anniversary, How the Mascot Became Our Mule. And we will start with, the first thing we want to say is,
Oh, no, you want to do thank yous? Oh.
there.
I thought you would. We're with this. You're going to thank
You
us.
said, okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. First things first is the fire exit is straight out this door and off to these two doors here in case there's an issue, which there shouldn't be. And bathrooms are through that door and to the left. You don't have to exit the building, although it was built in 1924. There were water closets at that time. We want to thank you very much from the Historical Society to the school, to Superintendent Todd Allen, Principal Andy Corman, the art teachers Annette Blake and Christina Boivin, who did a marvelous job out in the lobby. Dave Riley, who's helped set up everything for us.
And Josh.
And Josh.
Yes.
And Josh.
With
The current janitor for the school system. Now
I can do it.
Now you can flick it. Okay. First thing we want to do is say congratulations to the school. Newmarket High School was announced as one of the 10 best schools in New Hampshire. And those congratulations go to the students, the faculty, the staff, the administration, and also Newmarket's gubernatorial candidate, John Kuiper, mentioned this on WMUR TV last week during the debate. How we started. First, in 1918, the new folks are coming to work by groves, by families, for the new weave shed. And at the end of World War I, and in 1919, the veterans started returning. And when the men returned, it was very soon apparent to the town fathers that the old high school on top of Zion Hill, where we went to elementary school, wasn't going to fit the bill. So after much debate, they appropriated funds. Land was purchased where we are now. This all belonged at one point to Wentworth Cheswell, and his descendants sold the land to the school department. Construction began in October of 23. It continued throughout the summer. It was supposed to be completed by the beginning of September. Well, of course, that didn't happen. Contractors, some things never change. So the school finally opened on September 15th. That's when the students first came through the doors. A month later in October, they had a dedication ceremony with tours, and the public was invited. One of the reasons the tours were offered today is because the school opened during the pandemic, and at that time, no one couldn't go out and about. So they kind of postponed it now for tonight, and several people have come to the tours, took the tour and they left. They're not interested in the mules. And what is a school without janitorial staff? And here we have, who's George looking at it? Denny. Denny was the school janitor for almost 30 years. And he's a fascinating character, born in Ireland, came over with his Irish immigrant parents, lived in Newmarket, and he worked in the school. And there are some people here who were in the school and remember Denny. But we'll save those stories for another time. So here we are in this beautiful building 100 years later, after many additions, many town meetings, many renovations, here we are. If you're wrong.
I think this works. So tonight's program began with a question that we heard so many times. How did the mules become a mascot?
I don't know.
No? Okay. So that was the question. And there aren't too many mule mascots around nationally. One of them is Colby College, the white mule, which was adopted in 1924. The Army adopted, in West Point, they adopted the mule because they needed to do something different from the Navy, who had a goat as a mascot. Then there was the Missouri, state of Missouri, that had it as its state animal. For some reason, there was the 110th Fighter Squadron that adopted it as a mascot. Now, I've never seen a flying mule, but there you have it. And the Central Missouri Mules and Jennies was part of the University of Central Missouri. So earlier still, in 1828, the donkey appeared. And so it's not a mule, but when Andrew Jackson's opponents tried to use this as an insult, Jackson thought it was funny and included the donkey image on his campaign posters. So politics don't change much either. He defeated John Quincy Adams of Massachusetts, and he was America's first Democratic president. But it still doesn't tell us how Newmarket got the mules. And one guy by the name of Leland Gordon tried to explain it back in 2013 with this Newmarket Mules article. And he gets some of it right, you know, could be the animal, could be factory workers, but the article continues and it talks about some of the workers being youngsters who would come to earn some money after school, and talks about a bustling textile economy. Boys did work after school and during vacations, and they were called mules. But usually that, when that was described, it was after 1930, and that was the shoe shops, not during the textile industry. So he decided that the mascot name had nothing to do with the animal directly, but here we are. We still don't know quite why.
There was one story that I have heard a couple of times, and that is that it came from the boys when they were at the wharf unloading the bales of cotton onto the cotton wagons that was drawn by mules. Well, it's interesting, but the documentation doesn't really bear that out. This is a great photo. We don't know who's sitting on the bale of cotton, and we don't know what's pulling the car. But our earliest photographs of all of the animals are oxen and also horses. And the horses are mentioned and the oxen are mentioned in the company farm documents. And the horses are mentioned because they also pulled the fire apparatus in some of the fire carts. So I don't want to say it didn't happen, but if anybody has any documentation and any photographs to that effect, please let us know. So from the mills to the mules, how did we go from these boys in the 1880s to these guys in 1940? Well, it all began in 1779 with Samuel Compton in England. He created a new cotton spinning mule machine, and he took it from the Arkwell frame and the spinning jenny. Okay. And he created the mule spinner machine from these two. And he called it a mule spinner machine because a mule is a cross between a female horse and a male donkey. It's our favorite donkey. And because it's the cross, he just said it was the strength of a horse and the endurance of a donkey. It was the mule. His prototype in 1779 looked like this photo up here. However, the mule spinning machine that ended up in Newmarket from the early 1830s on was what this machine actually looked like. It was quite a bit different. How did it get here? England led the world in mill technology, and they had strict laws. None of that technology was allowed to leave the country. They kept that all secret, and only the government held the patents.
Okay. You may have heard of this guy, Samuel Slater. When he was 10, he was working in an English cotton mill. So he wasn't some upper-class kid, but he was smart, and he had a photographic memory. When American investors started sniffing around for English technology, here was Slater, who by then had worked with all the different machinery, so that law couldn't stop him from sailing over here with a head full of memorized plans. We won't even mention his resentment against the English class system. And talk about success. Slater became buddies with our New Hampshire Senator Daniel Webster. Andrew Jackson, our donkey friend, called him the father of the American Industrial Revolution, Samuel Slater. Back home in England, they called him Slater the Traitor. Slater's American mills were full of English machinery that he built in his own foundries. Just like back home in England, his mills used women and child labor. So here's the mule spinner machine. 150 feet long. That's longer than a basketball court by quite a bit. All those spindles, the movement back and forth. If you look on YouTube, mule spinner machines, you can just hear how loud those things were. And those kids worked on that machine 6 days a week. So to get an idea of how that work was done, you had not just one of these 150-foot items, two of them placed side by side and operated by a man who eventually became known as the mule spinner. And here's the evolution from the mule machine to the mule kid. So you can see the little piecer, the back boy, mules of the mule spinner, and then finally it just turned into just plain mules. These kids were mules. What did he do? He might work several years as a mule. How did he help? One of his jobs was squirting oil on the machine to keep it from overheating. Down in mill number 2 in 1857, they had a fire because of overheated machinery. So it was very important that you keep these things cool. There were bobbin boys, but don't you ever call a mule a bobbin boy. There's a hierarchy here. And many of the bobbin boys in the weaving room eventually did become mules later on. Mules worked in the spinning room and were anywhere from 11 years old to 20-something years old.
Now, our friend, Mr. Slater, wrote in his memoirs, and he talked about the mills in Newmarket, and he said, this is 1827. This is the listing, so I won't go through it, but these are the kids that worked in the mills in Newmarket at that time. However, 1880 tells us kind of a different story. These are the photos of our kids around 1880, 1870. And if you zero in on one kid, I love this kid. No idea who he is, but this kid's got attitude. But there's another part to this mule story. Back then, the good died young. Mule spinner cancer was discovered in around 1926 in England. A later study determined that there were 500 deaths between 1911 and 1938. Young men in their early 20s and 30s died of consumption. Death among these young men were all former mules, their occupation. Now, in 1898, Ambrose Nichols removed the mule spinner machines from the Newmarket mills, not so much because they are dangerous, which they were, but they didn't know it at that time. But when he went into production for silk, the mule spinner machines were no longer useful, so we got rid of them. But that was too late, even for men like Johnny Watson and his two brothers, who died of consumption of the abdomen. Now, the findings a little later by the Department of Labor in the US, this was in around August 1929, determined the cause for this particular disease. It was the lubrication of the oil onto the pressure bar itself was 1 pint of shale or tar oil per mule per day. And they put it in the lubrication to make the machine cooler and to run well. But what happened with centrifugal force, it turned into a spray. And these kids got hit with the spray in their face, in their arms, the neck. And you see the picture of these kids. It was very hot in the mills. They didn't wear any underwear. And they would have very light cotton denim trousers that they were wearing. They'd wipe this off on themselves. And because when you wipe everything off on your hands, it goes right down your front. And your hands go right down to your crotch. And the pressure against the pressure machine itself on the pressure bar, it caused lesions in the groin area. Over time, those lesions would travel into the abdomen. Once it traveled into the abdomen, it became fatal. And many times it would take up to 10 to even 15 years before it became obvious. And even if you changed your occupation, that damage has already started early on, and it follows you. The longer for teenage boys working on these machines, the worse off they became. Now, our friend Mr. Slater, in 1824, his mills in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, was the first mills in the nation to have a labor strike. And the reason it had a labor strike, it was created by women, young women, by protesting their 25% cut in wages and their working conditions, and they walked out. Fast forward, about 105 years later, here in Newmarket, it was the youngest women in the mills who walked out first, starting the strike of 1929. And you just imagine those girls walking out of Gallant's office as they go past this fitting room, and they holler out one last time to the boys, and the mule stuck.
Okay, so there's the mule. How did the mule get to school? A yearbook can tell us a lot. Okay, before the yearbook, in the 1930s, there was a mimeographed pamphlet, and you may have seen some of these outside in the lobby, the Newmarket. We have some here, check them out. There are no mules mentioned in them. The 1930s, no mules.
Would you like that, Chris?
Oh, sorry. I'm just not good at this. Yeah. So in 1940, a brand new yearbook format brings us the lamprey. And that title stayed for 60 years until the year 2000. It also mentions the mule in that yearbook for the first time. And we're not sure why it was blue, but back in the 1890s, there was a town and mill baseball schedule that read, "Our Blue Mules Baseball Team." Who knew? In the greater Portsmouth area, you can see they made the papers for the first time in 1941. Newmarket Mules, first public mention. The coach, Chet Kingsman, he was new too, a high school science teacher from Keene State College. He taught here. But those were the war years. Kingsman, the coach, and his mule team all served in World War II. 6 of them served in the Navy, 3 served in the U.S. Army, 2 were Marines, 1 was exempt, he worked in an aircraft factory. 4 of them served in the Pacific, 1 was at D-Day, 2 seniors and 1 junior boy left school early to enlist.
They all came back home, except for one. Billy Crowley, seated second from the right, was killed on a ship that exploded at Pearl Harbor.
Now, Coach Chester Kingsman joined the Air Force, and word came back from his family that he was missing in action. He had been shot down over Italy. A memorial service was held at St. Mary's Church. The school closed, and the kids went to the service. However, Chet wasn't done. In April of '44, on a bombing mission in Italy, weather conditions broke the formation. The aircraft caught enemy fire, and the aircraft co-pilot called for an urgent bailout. Kingsman shoved the navigator through the nose hatch and jumped out after him. Italians from a mountain village untangled him from the tree that he landed in. Risking their own lives, they hid him before the Germans approached. An Italian family shared their small cabin and sparse food. But when it became too dangerous to remain with them, Kingsman joined up with a group who stole supplies from the German, and they stole supplies from the Italians who collaborated with the Germans. And they were known as Tito's partisans. And the partisans were ruthless. Now, the following information comes from a declassified secret document about Kingsman's activity. And it's not fiction, although it sounds like it was made for a movie. It probably will be at some point. He's behind enemy lines. The Italians are fighting with the Germans, a heated battle, and what he was doing behind the lines was showing these partisans how to use the guns, the ammunition, the grenades that had been dropped previously by the British and the American aircraft. They're trained how to fight by Kingsman. They get into a pitched battle with the Germans. The partisans get scared and they take off for the hills, leaving Kingsman a little bit behind because he still has a gimpy leg from when he fell in the tree. The Germans capture him. They're taking him down to the German front, to the German lines. They stop at night, throw him a blanket. All the guys are lying on the ground, and he looks up and he notices that the guard is kind of nodding off a bit. Gets in his blanket, he rolls a couple of feet. Looks up, the guard's nodding off. Rolls a couple more feet. Looks up, heads to the hills. He goes all the way back to the mountain village family that he stayed with. He was hidden out there in a barn for a while. Then he's out and about, and a brigade of 45 Germans come up, capture him again. This time, in his pidgin Italian, he's talking to the Germans in their pidgin Italian. He convinces them that he is an Italian soldier fighting for Mussolini who was wounded in the war. Give him a Heil sign. They bought it. Said, where are the Germans now? He said, I can take you halfway down there. So he takes them down the valley around the bend to show them where the lines are. They thank him. He hightails it right back up to the village. He takes the village family that he's with into a cave. There had to be some communication beforehand that isn't mentioned here in the document. Into a cave, builds a strong shelter because there's a 3-day bombardment in that area by American and British aircraft. After the 3 days, he comes out. A Gurkha patrol comes by. Gurkhas were the Indian group fighting for the Allies. Flags him down, Americano, Americano, Americano. They take him back to his battalion. And a lot of the intelligence that he had gathered was pivotal in getting some of the Germans out of that area in Italy. Before he left Italy, and at the end of the war, he convinced the Red Cross to go back with him to the village, and they brought a whole cartload of food and supplies to the villages. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross for that achievement. Then after the war,
Well, first of all, How did coaching the mules prepare him for that? I don't know. But after the war, the mule became official. According to the principal and the Newmarket, he said, the 1948 Lamprey and the Newmarket Mule, there we go, okay, placed the accent on school spirit. It's the only official recognition of the mule as the school mascot. That was in 1948. And these are Marie Foley's kinder, gentler mules. They're so cute. And a few years later, the mule became a fashion statement. Mules on the uniforms. Mule sweatshirts, 1954. George,
you still have your sweatshirt? No, I think you could still fit into it, though.
the coach that year was Leo Landrock. He had grown up during the Depression, one of 8 children in Ashland, New Hampshire. His father was a weaver in the woolen mill, and after high school, Leo worked there too. During the war, he joined the U.S. Army Air Corps. After the war, he graduated from Plymouth Teachers College on the GI Bill. He taught in the North Country until 1951, when he joined Newmarket High as a social studies teacher and a coach. Under his coaching, the Newmarket Mules won state championships in track and basketball. Mr. Landrock soon became principal, a position he kept for 23 years. So far, he's the longest-serving principal of Newmarket High School. In 1989, teacher and coach Jack Brown, who's with us today, he's a former mule himself, had mules added to the girls' uniforms. In 1991, the varsity cheerleading squad wore the mule title, but that didn't last long. Somehow, having mules stuck on your chest for a girl is not that flattering. Come on, guys. Really. Let's go back to the yearbooks.
The mule's image changed over time, evolved quite a bit, as a matter of fact. 16 years later, it had not been on the cover of the yearbook. It wasn't until the class of 1964 put the mule on the cover of the yearbook. And that was an editorial decision by the staff, because they determined that year that class had won the state championship in basketball, in track, and in drama. And so they decided, let's put the kicking donkey, the mule, back on the cover. And that editorial staff is actually right here. It's George Phelan, Terry Zich, and, myself, and Gigi Brown was the junior editor at the time. And she was complaining about how much work it was. As a matter of fact, the class of 64, a lot of them are here today. If you could just stand, the class of 1964, because these people, you're looking at a historic lot. These people here are the very first baby boomers to graduate from Newmarket High School. The same mule continued for well over almost 2-3 decades with the same type of picture of the mule that we had. However, the mule started to get a little bit more masculine and a little bit more aggressive in the 90s. And we finally end up with Jeff Dachshund's donkey here. Not bad looking. However, I don't think we're going to mention the mules as a crossbreed genetically. New century, new look. In the 2000s, the bucking mule became a little bit more aggressive, and we had mule madness in 2007. The mule evolves even further in 2009, 2010, and 2012. Now, between 2011 and 2024, the word lamprey never again appears on the cover of the yearbook. And there's no indication of why. Perhaps it's climate change, maybe the Lamprey River just dried up. But today's mule is a far cry from the first mule of 1948. And we're going to jump from the mule to the mural. In 1956, the new gym was constructed, and as you can see from this photo, and as we all remember well, all posters and lettering had to be attached to string, and the string covered that beautiful, pristine granite wall. And God forbid a piece of Scotch tape or gum was seen 50 feet from that wall. The old Mascot from 1964 has been completely transformed now into a snorting, chomping work of art emerging from a muddy mural, and that had been out on the gym for several years, and that was due to Joey Frechette and Jeff Sprague. Now, 2003, we have a newer look. It comes with Jamie Hayes' mule. It broke through the gym wall in 2011. Now, there's a story about Jamie that if any of you don't know, ask him, I'm sure he'll tell you. It was during one home game, all of the Newmarket basketball team fouled out, except for one, Jamie. Rather than forfeit the game, Jamie played the whole team, the rest of the game himself, running up court, running down court, all over the place. Newmarket lost, but Jamie got an ovation for being probably the most stubborn mule of all. And today's mural was painted by the former custodian Bob French in the summer of 2011. And so in ending, so you can get out to the debating time and get back home, we only have one thing left to say. Thank you all for coming.